Now let's talk about the conclusion of hypothesis testing. The final step of a hypothesis test is to make a decision about null hypothesis. For that, we can use p-value or test statistic. We reject null hypothesis if test statistic is outside the critical values, and also we reject null hypothesis if p-value is less than given alpha. So now let's look at this example here. In this example, we have test statistic z equals to negative 2.05. To draw a conclusion, we can find p-value or critical value. So let's try both for this problem. First, let's find p-value. P-value is simply the area below negative 2.05. For this, let's look up negative 2.05 on Z table. So let me pull up my table up on the screen. Now we'll be looking at negative 2.05. So basically we'll be looking at row of negative 2.0 and column of 0.05. So that gives us 0.0202, this value here, 0.0202. So therefore, let me write that down here. So therefore, our p-value is 0.0202. So this is our p-value, and our alpha is 0.05, 0.05. Since p-value is less than alpha, we reject our null hypothesis. Therefore, reject null hypothesis. Now, let's do this using critical value. To find critical value using a Z table, let me pull up my table up on the screen. Now, find number closest to 0.05 among these tiny 4 decimal place numbers. So, closest I can find here are this one, 0.0505 and 0.0495, this one. So the closest number that I can find here is 0.0505 and 0.0495. So the Z values for these are negative 1.64 and negative 1.65. We take the value between them, which is negative 1.645. Therefore, critical value is, let me write that down. So let me write that down over here. So therefore, critical value is negative 1.645. And test statistics is negative 2.05. So now let me draw a diagram here. Let me actually use a different color pen. If our critical value, negative 1.645 is here, so this one is negative 1.645, then our test statistic, negative 2.05, is somewhere here, negative 2.05. From here, we can see that test statistic is outside the critical value, so therefore, we reject our null hypothesis. Next, let's look at this example here. This is a two-tailed test with t-distribution. First, let's do this using method of critical value. To find critical value, we'll use table. So for that, let me pull up my table up on the screen. Now, look at the column of alpha by 2. Since it is a two-tailed test, so look at the column of 0.05 by 2, which is 0.025. So this column. And look at the row of degrees of freedom, which is n minus 1, which is 16 here. So 16 here, basically we'll be looking at the row of 16 and column of 0.025, this column here. So that gives us 2.120, this number here. So therefore, critical values are are negative 2.120 and 2.120. And we know our test statistic is T is negative 1.92. Now let me draw a diagram so that we can see our test statistic and critical values on this graph. So let's say our critical values is this. So this point here is negative 2.120 and this point is 2.120. That means our test statistic, which is negative 1.92, is here. So this point here, let me mark it with different colors. So this is negative 1.92. So from this diagram here, we can clearly see that test statistic is inside the critical values. Therefore, we do not reject our null hypothesis. So now let me show you how to make this decision using p-value. So to get p-value with t-distribution, we must use technology. Let's use TI-84. Now let's use TI-84. So for that, let me pull up my calculator up on the screen. Now go to second distribution. Then we'll be using TCDF, which is number 6 here. TCDF, then hit enter. So here we want to find area below of negative 1.92. So enter some large negative number like negative 999 for lower value, and for upper value we'll be using negative 1.92, negative 1.92, and our degrees of freedom is 16. And hit enter and hit enter. So that gives us this number here. Therefore, p-value is 2 times of 0.0364, that is 0.0729. So now we have p-value which is 0.0729, and we know our alpha is 0.05. Since p-value is greater than alpha, do not reject our null hypothesis. So do not reject null. Next, let's look at this example. Here, alpha is 0.10 and p-value is 0.04. So we can compare them right away and we can see that p-value is less than alpha. So we reject our null hypothesis. So reject null hypothesis. Thank you for watching. We hope this video was helpful. Please like and subscribe our channel. We will be bringing more and more videos on variety of topics.